December 19, 1944. The Ardennes. Snow falls in thick, wet sheets over the frozen forests of Belgium. The pines stand silent, except for the echo of tank treads grinding through slush and mud. Somewhere in that white fog, a column of American Sherman tanks inches forward along a narrow road near Bastogne. Their engines cough in the cold. Visibility is nearly zero. And yet, they move with eerie coordination, as if guided by an unseen hand. To the German soldiers watching from the treeline, the Shermans seem clumsy, exposed, loud, perfect targets. The Wehrmacht has faced them before. They know their weaknesses: thinner armor than the Panzer IV, a gun that can't always pierce a Tiger's hull. They mock them as Tommy Cookers, rolling coffins for their crews. But what they don't see, what they can't hear, is the quiet hum of power inside every turret. A voice, a link, a secret. Inside each Sherman, men are speaking softly into headsets, their words carried invisibly through the storm. Red leader to blue 1, enemy armor 2 o'clock. Copy that. Adjusting position. No flares. No runners. No guesswork. Just instant, seamless coordination. The German observers assume it's luck. It isn't. It's technology. It's communication. It's a revolution. And it's happening in real time, right under their eyes. The Battle of the Bulge would become the largest and bloodiest fight the U.S. Army ever fought. Over 600,000 Americans stood against Hitler's last desperate offensive. Yet beneath the clash of steel and snow lay another, quieter war, a war of information. While German tanks boasted thicker armor and bigger guns, they lacked something far more decisive: connection. Most panzer crews had no radios at all. Orders were shouted, relayed by flag, or carried by motorcycle. Confusion spread faster than command. But in the American columns, every Sherman, from the lead scout to the rear guard, carried a radio built by companies like SCR, Bendix, and RCA. Compact, reliable, crystal clear. In the words of one U.S. tanker, it was like having eyes beyond the hill. That invisible advantage would rewrite the meaning of modern warfare. American assembly lines, sparks flying off steel, workers soldering circuits, women packing crates of radios marked. 2 years earlier, in the factories of Detroit and New Jersey, engineers were solving problems most soldiers didn't even know existed. The American military-industrial machine wasn't just building tanks, it was building networks. The SCR-508 radio, 25 watts of rugged innovation, allowed tank commanders to communicate not just with each other, but with infantry, artillery, and air support. For the first time in history, a moving armored unit could think as one organism. Every tank became both a weapon and a node, a part of a living, breathing system of coordination. And this, more than any gun or engine, was what made the Sherman truly lethal. The Germans, for all their mechanical genius, never realized the scale of what they were up against. To the men inside the Panzers, the enemy's edge seemed impossible to explain. Reports from the front described American armor appearing suddenly, flanking faster than predicted, responding to artillery in seconds. Field commanders wrote, "They always seem to know where we are." It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was the voice in the headset, the web of information that moved faster than any bullet. The irony was bitter. Germany, the birthplace of Hertz, Siemens, and Telefunken, pioneers of radio technology, had entered the war with the most advanced theories in electromagnetic communication. Yet by 1944, their field doctrine had failed to keep up with the reality of mass mechanized warfare. Their obsession with precision engineering had blinded them to a simpler truth. In a modern war, the winner is not the one who fires first, but the one who talks first. A U.S. tank crew huddled inside a Sherman. The gunner adjusts his headset. The driver wipes frost from the periscope. A commander's voice cuts through static. "Commander. Enemy column moving east. Blue 4 swing left flank. Red 2 hold the crossroads." The orders pass in seconds. The tanks shift formation like a single creature. Synchronized, precise. In the woods beyond, a German anti-tank gun opens fire. One round misses. The Shermans adjust instantly. Within moments, they return fire in unison. The German position vanishes in smoke. The difference isn't just firepower, it's rhythm. The contradiction of the Sherman was at the heart of the Allied war effort. A tank often mocked for its fragility, yet capable of winning battles by thinking faster than its enemies. The Wehrmacht soldiers saw crude steel, they missed the circuitry. They saw movement, they missed the message. The men of the 4th Armored Division, racing to relieve Bastogne that Christmas, trusted their radios more than their maps. They navigated the fog not by sight but by sound, the reassuring hiss of the signal, the clipped voice of command. To them, radio wasn't just a tool. It was survival. In the chaos of snow and shellfire, it was the only thing that made sense. History remembers tanks for their armor and their guns. But this story is about something quieter and far more profound. It's about how connection became the most powerful weapon of the 20th century. It's about how a few pounds of circuitry inside a steel hull changed the course of modern war. It's about how, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the Germans never realized that the Shermans they faced weren't just tanks. They were transmitters. A moving, talking, thinking network, decades ahead of its time. Static fades into silence. The camera lingers on a lone Sherman advancing through snow. This is the untold story of how American ingenuity turned communication into combat power, how voices carried through the fog of war could tip the balance of history. It is a story of irony and innovation, of machines that spoke when men could not. And it asks a question that echoes beyond the battlefields of 1944. When technology gives one side the power to speak and the other only the power to shoot, which side truly wins? Fade out. In the end, the Sherman's greatest weapon was not its gun, nor its armor, but its voice. This is the story of how the unseen wires of communication redefined power, and how an army that could listen and answer changed the fate of civilization itself. Before the thunder of battle came the quiet hum of invention. The build-up, the age of silence. In the late 1930s, armies still fought as they had in the Great War, by sight, by line, by flag. Orders moved slower than bullets. Communication meant runners dodging artillery shells, or messengers on motorbikes weaving through smoke. In 1940, during the Blitzkrieg in France, German Panzer divisions stunned the world with their speed and coordination. Yet behind their lightning advance lay a fragile truth. Only command tanks had radios. Most of the armored spearheads followed by hand signal or instinct. It worked as long as they were winning. But when the tide turned, that weakness became fatal. By 1942, American industry had begun to mobilize on a scale no empire in history had ever matched. Henry Kaiser's shipyards launched a Liberty ship every 4 days. General Motors and Ford shifted from cars to tanks, trucks, and aircraft. But the heart of the transformation lay not in the steel but in the signal. The U.S. Army Signal Corps, often overlooked, rarely celebrated, became the invisible backbone of Allied might. They knew that mobility without communication was chaos. So they built a system that would allow every unit, from a single platoon to an entire armored division, to speak as one. In New Jersey, engineers at RCA and Western Electric were handed an impossible task: make a radio that was small enough to fit inside a tank, strong enough to survive a battlefield, and simple enough for a 19-year-old farm boy to operate in the dark. They called it the SCR-508. 25 watts. FM transmission. Operable even through static, mud, and shock. It could link one tank to another across miles, instantly. No crackle, no delay. It was the sound of the future. Archival image, U.S. Army instructors in Camp Polk, Louisiana, 1943. The training manuals were blunt. Without radio, your tank is blind. Crews drilled for hours in radio discipline. They learned brevity codes, voice procedures, call signs. They practiced synchronization until it was second nature, until the very rhythm of speech became part of warfare. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the German Panzerwaffe was beginning to fracture. After Stalingrad, Hitler's resources were stretched thin. Radio production lagged behind demand. In 1944, less than half of German tanks had reliable two-way sets. Many relied on outdated AM models prone to interference and capture. Their machines were formidable: the Tiger, the Panther, the King Tiger, each a monument of engineering. But they fought as individuals, not as a network. And in modern war, isolation is death. June 6, 1944. Normandy. As dawn broke over the English Channel, the largest invasion force in history hurled itself onto the beaches of France. Behind the chaos of Omaha and Utah, a second invasion unfolded, one of invisible frequencies and coded messages. From the first day of D-Day, every American tank landing on the beach carried a radio. Each Sherman commander could talk not just to his platoon, but to infantry units, artillery batteries, and reconnaissance aircraft above. When one tank bogged down in a hedgerow, another took its place, guided by voice, not sight. It was here that the invisible advantage became undeniable. The Germans, dug into the Bocage countryside, fought from every hedge and farmhouse. They ambushed with Panzerfausts and 88mm guns. But they fought blind. Their local commanders couldn't coordinate beyond their line of sight. When the Americans adapted, calling in artillery, adjusting movement, relaying targets. The Germans misread it as luck. They didn't understand that they were fighting not an army of individuals, but a talking machine. Interior of a Sherman tank, close-up of hands tuning the SCR-508, a voice calling through static. Tanker radio. Eagle 2 to Eagle lead. Target in orchard, grid 4825. Request fire. Artillery command. Roger Eagle. Fire mission inbound. Seconds later, the orchard erupts. A single voice had moved a battery 5 miles away. The SCR-508 changed everything. It turned tanks into mobile command posts. When divisions like Patton's Third Army broke through at Avranches in July 1944, radio networks guided the entire operation. The speed of the American advance, 100 miles in 5 days, was not just the result of fuel and fury. It was orchestration, conducted in real time through radio waves. Patton himself was obsessed with communications. He once said, "If I can see it, I can hit it. If I can talk to it, I can control it." He demanded every tank company maintain constant radio readiness. The call signs, red, blue, white, and gold, became more than colors. They became the lexicon of victory. 3. The confrontation, static and silence. By the winter of 1944, the Germans were desperate. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes offensive, was their final gamble. Hitler's goal: split the Allied lines, seize Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. He gathered 200,000 men and over 1,000 tanks for the assault. It began in silence. December 16th. Dawn. Fog rolled over the forests of Belgium. Artillery shattered the American front. The Bulge was born. The German advance cut deep into Allied territory. For a moment, panic spread. Traffic jams of retreating convoys, broken communications, units scattered in confusion. But the Americans had one lifeline: radio. Even as telephone lines were cut and runners lost, tank crews stayed connected. In Bastogne, surrounded and outnumbered, elements of the 10th Armored Division coordinated defensive fire through radio alone. Units shared ammunition and fuel by voice command, coordinating under siege. On the German side, chaos reigned. Captured diaries describe entire battalions cut off from higher command. The thick forests and heavy snow blocked runners. Radio silence, imposed for secrecy, became a trap. One panzer commander later wrote, "We did not know where our friends were. We fought alone." An imagined radio intercept station. Allied operators listening to German static. The Wehrmacht's network was patchwork, fragile, fragmented. Frequency discipline was poor. Many units jammed their own signals. Meanwhile, the Americans used frequency hopping coordination, pre-assigned call tables, and backup channels. When a tank went down, another filled the frequency gap. Information flowed like blood. This was the invisible front, a war not of bullets but of bandwidth. 4. The human element, voices in the fog. Inside the Sherman, the war felt both immense and intimate. The crew lived in a steel womb barely 10 feet wide. The smell of oil, sweat, and cordite mixed with the buzz of electricity. Each man had a headset. Each could hear the others: commander, driver, gunner, loader, co-driver, a 5-man symphony in constant dialogue. Commander, radio. Target front. Fire when ready. Gunner. On the way. Loader. Up. Driver. Moving left. The sound of teamwork became the pulse of the battlefield. To outsiders, the Sherman looked crude. But to those inside, it felt alive. The radio made the tank more than a machine. It made it a conversation. Letters home reflect that intimacy. Private Harold Monroe, 4th Armored Division, wrote to his wife in January 1945. "We talk all the time in here. Sometimes it's orders. Sometimes it's jokes. The radio makes it feel like we're not alone. I can hear the other boys out there even when I can't see them. That's what keeps me going." On the German side, the experience was often the opposite. A Panther gunner recalled after the war, "We never knew where anyone was. We could see smoke, hear engines, but not our comrades. When a tank was hit, we only found out when it stopped firing." The psychological divide was stark. For the Americans, the radio gave confidence. For the Germans, silence bred fear. The consequences, the new rhythm of war. By the end of the Ardennes campaign, the results were clear. The U.S. Army had contained and reversed Hitler's final offensive. Over 19,000 Americans were dead, but the German losses were catastrophic. Nearly 100,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Thousands of panzers destroyed or abandoned. When analysts studied the battle afterward, they found a pattern. American units with functioning radios consistently outmaneuvered and outlasted those without. Radio-equipped Shermans could call artillery within 3 minutes of first contact. German units took over 20. That 17-minute difference, multiplied across hundreds of encounters, saved thousands of lives. The U.S. Army had built not just a fighting force, but a communications ecosystem. From the SCR-300 carried by infantry to the SCR-508 in tanks and the SCR-522 in aircraft, every channel was designed to interlock. A platoon could call artillery. A tank could talk to a plane. A general could talk to a single gunner if needed. It was the first fully integrated battlefield communications network in human history. It also marked the dawn of what we now call network-centric warfare, the idea that victory comes not from the strongest weapon, but from the fastest flow of information. Post-battle footage, burnt forests, destroyed tanks, a lone radio dangling from a wire. In the ruins of the Ardennes, captured German officers examined the American radios. They were stunned. Many had assumed such technology was limited to headquarters, not every single vehicle. One report, captured by U.S. intelligence, noted simply, "The enemy's tanks fight as though connected by one mind." They had finally seen the truth too late. 6. Reflection, the invisible empire. By 1945, the world's battlefields had changed forever. The lessons of the Sherman's radio went far beyond tanks. They shaped the next century. When the war ended, the veterans who had lived by radio carried that instinct home. They became engineers, entrepreneurs, and inventors. The same signal corpsmen who had wired tanks in Normandy would later wire America with television, radar, and early computing systems. The networks that would one day define the Cold War, the space race, and even the Internet, all traced their lineage to the hum inside a Sherman turret. What began as a tactical tool became a symbol of a new age, the age of connection. For the German veterans, the revelation was bitter. Their machines had been marvels of craftsmanship, masterpieces of engineering. But their war had been waged in isolation. After the war, many admitted that their defeat came not from lack of courage, but from lack of coordination. As General Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg, later reflected, "The essence of modern warfare is communication. Without it, mechanization is meaningless." The irony was absolute. The nation that pioneered radio had lost to the army that mastered its simplest form. 7. The broader horizon, the language of power. The story of the Sherman's radio is more than a tale of hardware. It is a mirror of civilization itself. Every empire rises on communication. Roman roads, British telegraphs, American radio waves. The ability to coordinate, to speak and respond, defines power as much as weapons ever could. In war, as in life, silence isolates. Connection multiplies. When those American tankers rolled across Europe, their greatest strength was not the armor around them, but the invisible bond between them, a brotherhood carried on airwaves. They didn't just conquer territory, they conquered uncertainty. Every voice transmitted was a promise. "I'm here. I hear you. You're not alone." That promise reshaped the world. Fade to faint static, then the soft rhythm of Morse code. From Normandy to Bastogne, from Patton's dash to the Rhine to the liberation of the camps, that same web of signals held the Allied armies together. Every success, every advance, moved to the tempo of the radio. The voice became the new heartbeat of war. And though the Germans never realized it then, those invisible signals had already sealed their fate. The war of steel had become a war of sound, and the side that could listen faster would win. A lone Sherman idling on a hill, antenna swaying in the wind. The world would remember the Sherman for its numbers, 49,000 built, spread across continents. But its true legacy cannot be counted in tons or rounds fired. It lies in the unseen, in the hum between frequencies, in the human voice carried through danger and doubt. That was the moment when warfare ceased to be a contest of machines and became a conversation of minds. Sound, a gentle hum of static. Then, slowly, the faint rhythm of tank engines fades beneath the sound of wind. In the aftermath of victory, the forests of Europe fell silent. The echoes of engines and artillery faded into history. But the airwaves, those invisible pathways of power, never stopped humming. What began as battlefield necessity became the blueprint for a new civilization. The radio inside the Sherman was more than a piece of wartime equipment. It was a prototype for the modern world, for every command link, every digital signal, every satellite orbiting above us today. The men who had once whispered through headsets while snow fell over the Ardennes carried that instinct home. They became the engineers of the post-war boom, the generation that wired the globe. Television, radar, telecommunications, the unseen inheritance of the armored voice. Archival images, post-war factories, cities rising from rubble, antennas stretching toward the sky. In America, the Signal Corps evolved into a force of science. Its veterans joined Bell Labs, RCA, and the infant computer industry. They laid the foundations for transistor research, microwave communication, and early networking systems. The same logic that once guided tank columns across France, the ability to share, to coordinate, to act instantly, became the soul of modern computing. The whisper in the Sherman became the hum of the mainframe. The battlefield net became the internet. A line of continuity ran straight from the mud of Bastogne to the silicon of California. It was as if humanity had discovered, in the chaos of war, the blueprint for connection. For the Germans, the irony was profound. Their defeat revealed not the limits of courage or machinery, but of imagination. They had perfected the art of the individual machine, the tiger, the panther, each built like a cathedral of steel. But they had failed to understand the collective rhythm of a network. After the war, surviving officers studied captured Allied radios with astonishment. They wrote long reports about tactical agility and inter-unit synchronization. Some even admitted that, had they known of the scale of Allied communication, their entire strategy might have changed. But history does not grant second chances. By the time realization came, the war of voices had already been won. Sound, the click of a switch, followed by a soft radio transmission. This is Red Leader. Mission complete. Returning to base. That clipped voice, calm, disciplined, almost mundane, carries the full weight of the 20th century. It is the sound of order in chaos. The sound of a civilization learning to think aloud. The moral irony. The great irony of this story is that the most advanced weapon of the war was not forged in fire but in silence. In the careful calibration of circuits, the tuning of frequencies, the art of listening. The Germans had trusted in hardness, in armor, in firepower, in precision. The Americans had trusted in something softer, more human, communication. And that became the moral axis of the conflict itself. One side sought domination through control. The other sought coordination through connection. The difference is subtle, but civilization hangs on subtleties. For the tankers who lived it, the memory never faded. Decades later, veterans could still recall the sound of the radio, the soft hiss before a command, the coded call signs, the brief crackle before a friend's voice came through the static. It was the sound of reassurance, of purpose. To them, the radio meant they were never truly alone, even in the loneliest place on earth. Corporal Thomas H. Bailey of the 37th Tank Battalion said in a 1980 interview, "You could lose sight of every other tank in the fog. You could be sure you were the last man alive. But then you'd hear that voice, 'Red 2, this is Red 1. We're still with you.' That sound, that meant life. The hidden cost of victory. Yet, victory carried its own burden. In the decades after the war, the same systems of connection that had united armies began to bind the world. Communication became instantaneous. Borders shrank. The planet turned into a single, restless network. And with it came a new paradox, the same one born in the steel belly of a Sherman tank. When everything and everyone is connected, the noise becomes endless. Signal and static blend into one. The radio that once saved lives on the battlefield became, in time, a symbol of humanity's hunger to reach beyond itself, and its struggle to manage the consequences. The soldiers who once trusted their lives to a few words over the air could scarcely imagine a world where billions would speak at once. Modern imagery, satellites orbiting Earth, fiber optic cables under oceans, soldiers with digital headsets. The war of frequencies never truly ended. It evolved. From radio to radar, from encryption to code, from analog to digital. Today's conflicts are fought in networks, cyber, space, and data streams, but the principle is unchanged. The side that can talk, can listen, can connect faster, still wins. The Sherman's radio was the first heartbeat of that idea. It taught us that information is power, and that silence, in war or in life, can be fatal. The legacy of connection. When we look back at that frozen forest in 1944, at those young men navigating through snow and smoke, we see more than machines or soldiers. We see the dawn of an idea, that unity born through communication can overcome isolation, fear, and even chaos itself. The Germans never realized that the American advantage wasn't just mechanical, it was philosophical. It was the belief that shared information could be stronger than individual might. That every voice mattered in the chorus of command. That freedom itself depends on connection. Because in the end, democracy and radio share the same principle. Many voices, one signal. Montage, veterans shaking hands, restored Sherman tanks at memorial parades, families listening to old radios crackling with history. Today the Shermans that once rolled through Europe sit silent in museums and parks. Their armor is rusted, their engines still. But if you listen closely, if you lean near the turret where the radio once hummed, you can almost hear it. A faint echo. A whisper across time. Red leader to blue one, copy that. A fragment of history suspended in the static. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, humanity found a way to speak. Universal meaning. What this story reveals is not just about war but about us. That our greatest strength lies not in destruction, but in communication, in the fragile, defiant act of reaching out through the noise and saying, I hear you. From the radios of the 1940s to the smartphones of today, the same truth endures. Our survival depends on connection. The Germans never realized it in time. But the world that followed did. Because from those Shermans, from those young voices carried through static and fear, emerged the lesson of an entire age. That progress is the art of turning chaos into conversation. In the end, the Sherman's greatest weapon was not its gun, nor its armor, but its voice. A voice that spoke across the frozen fields of Europe, across decades of invention, across the very arc of human civilization. And perhaps, that is the real victory. That in a war built on silence and terror, men found a way to listen, to speak, to connect. In the end, they discovered that the most powerful weapon of all was not steel, but understanding, the simple human power to be heard.